CBDC is really on its way in most countries and at most central banks across the world. And what I have to say as a monetary reformer, I mean, CBDC basically that's sovereign money, and nevertheless, I'm not particularly enthusiastic about the new developments in CBDC because, in various respects, the way CBDC is now going to be designed and implemented is not exactly what we had envisaged under monetary reform. To begin with, let us look in the statutes and form of CBDC, and it's apparently a new type of central bank fiat money. And it's a third type in addition to central bank notes and interbank settlement reserves. As I said, it's sovereign money, and thus it has the status of legal tender, or also lawful money, as the term is in the United States. And it serves as a base money for still existing money surrogates, such as bank money and other money surrogates more. So far in recent years, a distinction was made between a traditional account-based CBDC using cashless central bank money in the conventional sense, book money, and new tokenized or digitized CBDC. And that distinction is just being dropped because amounts of cryptocurrency on a blockchain or on another database are held there in a way that is comparable to, say, an amount, or call it a digital vault or a purse, or however you want to call it. And in any case, CBDC is a cryptocurrency on a special central bank ledger, and that is the central bank, the CBDC core ledger of the central bank, and that one is separate from conventional central bank reserve accounts. And that's by and large is what has become more or less definite by now. In most countries, I have some information about, and these that ledger includes, let's say, sub-addresses and column accounts, vaults, purses, as I said, and there the CBDC, the segregated CBDC quantities are stored and can be managed either in individual ownership or run by a payment service provider such as a bank, in fiduciary operational management of these individual sub-accounts, details depending on the respective national system design. The individual owners, they can access their CBDC by means of an e-wallet, or say a digital wallet. And that term e-wallet or digital wallet, that's catchy. So one can imagine to have a kind of portemonnaie, but that's a little misleading because such a wallet is not a container of money. It's not like a cash box. Rather, it is a type of pass, a kind of key that gives you access to an address on a cryptographic monetary database. And such an individual e-wallet that's issued by a payment service provider to a user, and it allows the user to check the CBDC balance on the related digital account or vault, and it allows to activate cash-like direct payments payer to payee. That's very important, without monetary intermediation by a bank or another payment service provider. Put differently, there is no more bank money involved here. So banks act technically as payment facilitators, and helping technically to manage e-wallets technically, but there is no monetarily, there is no more bank money involved here. Considering the operational architecture of the CBDC systems, it's going to be still a two-tier system and similar to cash circulation. And so it's two-tier, the issuance is two-tier, but the circulation of the CBDC, that's not two-tier, that's a single circuit. It's a single circuit circulation, so to say, just with CBDC. There is no more that split circulation with central bank reserves on the one hand and bank money on the other. Just one single circulation, but involving two tiers. Do you see that figure here with the left, the central bank banks and the clients?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Fine. The first tier, that's the central bank. It issues the CBDC to the banks or other payment service providers, and the central bank uses conventional channels for doing this, such as open market repurchase agreements and regular refinancing operations. And then for the banks, the cash that the central bank money is withdrawable, so to say, in CBDC. And the second tier is the banks, and they deploy the CBDC to us, the users, and doing so according to user demand, and doing so in exchange for bank money or cash. So we exchange bank money or cash for or against CBDC. And so the mutual exchangeability of bank money and CBDC is granted, albeit, as I have to say, just in principle, because in practice, the use of CBDC is at the beginning very much restricted. And the retail transactions are limited by daily or monthly amounts. For example, in China, where the digital yuan has already been introduced on a very large scale, the limit is an amount of about 730 or 40 US dollars. So I mean it's in digital yuan, but the value of it is about 730, $40. And to my knowledge, in Sweden, the so-called e-krona, that is going to be restricted, analogous to the way that the use of solid physical cash is restricted today in Sweden. And digital euros will be restricted to 1,000 euro per transaction, and having 3,000 euros in store. And if more CBDC is coming in, more digital euros will be coming in, then there is a waterfall mechanism. It's called a waterfall mechanism, which automatically converts the CBDC back into bank money, which is, of course, a mechanism to protect bank money, protecting bank money from draining off in larger quantities. The banks in this arrangement, when they use CBDC, when they need CBDC, they need to have the CBDC already available, like cash in vault, and have it pre-financed to 100%, much like cash today. And there are various ways in which banks can obtain the CBDC: by borrowing from us, the customers, or on the open money market from other financial institutions, or directly from the CBDC. But after all, as far as CBDC here is involved, there is no more fractional reserve banking with CBDC. A few words on the reasons for CBDC against the background of the present bank money regime. Its inherent instability, the proneness to crises, and apparent problems of governability with bank money. And seen against that background, CBDC is not an arbitrary option, but it's a necessity in the public interest. Because, first of all, CBDC is a safe and secure stock of money that cannot disappear like bank money in a balance sheet crisis. And moreover, a growing and big enough quantity of sovereign money is decisive in retaining or restoring sovereign money creation, which is tantamount to regaining monetary sovereignty, because you see, having a sovereign national currency unit without having a critical mass of sovereign money in public circulation, that's like having an empty shell. You know? And CBDC, the more CBDC there will be, this will provide a strong transmission lever for effectual monetary policy, helping avoid bubbles and sectoral banking crises, fostering stability, and not least, it will generate increased central bank revenue to the benefit of the public purse. And not least, that CBDC that will be owned by us, the users of the CBDC, rather than being a bank liability, as is the case with bank money today. There are further advantages of CBDC for both providers and users, for both sides, and that includes lower cost of production and provision. And this is the result of less procedural steps in the payment chain. It's easier to proceed with digital currency than with the conventional bank money. And this also involves a faster speed of payments. As you can see in this table, the middle range here, that's the transactions per second that can be achieved in the current payment system of banks and central banks, including the central bank's real-time gross settlement payment systems. So it's in the range of 1,000 to 7,000 transactions per second, some even up to 10,000. And the digital yuan currently can be at 10,000, and the still more advanced digital currency transfers using a blockchain or some other system can achieve up to 300,000 transactions per second. That was achieved 2 years ago with the digital euro blockchain. It was a test blockchain. It might be different with a regular everyday operations. What is more, there is improved ease of handling. That will, so to say, it's more convenient. And moreover, future digital tokens will be programmable. And that may even be contrary to what most people think today. That can even help to enhance privacy, financial privacy. I come back to that immediately. At this point, what is important from my point of view is that bank money, as we know it, is hardly competitive with CBDC. If bank money were exposed to competition with CBDC, rather than being shielded from competition, as is the case at the beginning, then bank money is not competitive with CBDC. Now, questions of privacy. Surveys, there are quite many surveys held on introducing digital central bank money and so on. And these surveys consistently show that the biggest concern of people in almost all countries, the biggest concern is They relate to the safety of money and the financial privacy. So there are concerns about CBDC as a door opener for Big Brother. So Big Brother watching you, Big Brother patronizing you, even perhaps telling you on what to spend or not to spend your money, and or even set an expiration date at which date money not spent would be seized. And in my opinion, such dystopian fears are largely exaggerated. They are partly pure fantasy and partly, as I dare say, willful disinformation from the side of vested interests. As to CBDC programmability, smart contract functionality, as this is also called, that can help facilitate the management of payments and contractual obligations already today, and all the more so in the coming Internet of Things, in the machine-to-machine communication and so on. Nevertheless, I mean, it is good to know that first-generation CBDC is not centrally programmable. No. So the digital yuan that exists is not programmable. And the digital euro is not going to be programmable. And the Bank of England has no plans to make the digital pound centrally programmable. No, so the pound, the Bank of England thinks about making CBDC programmable for individual users, but that's not decided, and that's a completely different questions from central programmability. And what is possible with CBDC, that is, it's of course traceable. That's quite natural with cashless payments. Yeah, there is always a trace, and in that sense, payments with CBDC are traceable, like cashless payments with bank money, but they are not programmable. And considering the problem of privacy in money and payments, we have to see that problem that has always existed since there is cashless payment. And it should be clear to us that in the existing bank money regime, the operational procedures involved do not warrant any privacy whatsoever. No, there is no financial privacy in the existing bank money regime, in the sense that the banks or other payment service providers, they know everything about the accounts and the payments of their customers, and state authorities can demand to know everything about someone's finances, certainly on the basis of judicial authorization, which is okay from my point of view. But that which guarantees privacy or, say, confidentiality, today with bank money as well as tomorrow with CBDC, that's regulation. That's applicable law on data protection, privacy protection, banking secrecy, property rights, freedom of choice, and other civil rights and liberties. I mean, of course, such things can be abused in some way. That's I wouldn't say quite natural, but it can happen. So, and when there is always we have always to take into account some criminal energy here and there. And so there is a legal principle since ancient Rome, and it says abusus non tollit usum, which means that the abuse of something does not negate the regular proper use of that thing. And yeah, inevitably there is a trade-off with CBDC, a trade-off between financial privacy on the one hand and compliance with necessary regulation on the other. Regulation such as on anti-money laundering, or know your customer requirements, fiscal rules, and similar requirements. And thus there is the need to strike a balance. That's inevitable. We cannot avoid that. Not in a technical way. For example, in the digital euro in the making includes a user identifier. And that user identifier is a pseudonym. It's not our clear name, it's a pseudonym. And that pseudonym is automatically machine generated by the respective payment service provider. That payment service provider has no control on that. It's done automatically by some sort of algorithm that cannot be manipulated. And that user identifier is not attributable to a person or to a business by the European Central Bank or national central banks, is nor by the tax office or some other state authority. And that's actually very similar to what we have today, in that the central bank has highly aggregated data of the cash it has put into circulation, but no knowledge and no access to individual users and their account balances and payments. Furthermore, there are now quite a few novel crypto designs which actually, unlike bank money, enable a high degree of cash-like anonymity by the crypto technology itself. And to give an example, here is the GNU Taler. And that's a crypto coin that is already being tested and used. It's a crypto coin based on an operating system called GNU. It's a Unix-like operating system. And so the GNU Taler is based on that multi-purpose operating system. And it works using so-called blind signatures rather than a blockchain. And that GNU Taler is designed for single-sided anonymity, which means the GNU Taler keeps the payer anonymous, while the identity of the payee can be made transparent. So when you go shopping, that means you remain anonymous, while the shop, if need be, can be identified and is taxable. So Big Brother would not know on what you have spent your money. So I would like to stop here for the first part, and now back to you, Stephen.
Very good. Alfonso, what we're going to do now is let's go into breakout rooms for, we'll say no more than 10 minutes, maybe 9 minutes, just for people to talk, a few thoughts around the room, and come up with a quick question. We won't have too much time in that room, so we can stay on schedule, and we'll have another breakout room too. So I'm ready anytime, Alfonso. And I think for Joseph and myself, I'd like to keep us out of rooms so we can maybe plan if we need to. But then there's a leave button on the bottom right, Joseph, if you need to use that.
We're ready to do breakout rooms, so people are going to be receiving a notification on your screen. Please accept that, and you're going to be taken to a breakout room. I'll see you all in 9 minutes.
Very, very nice, Joseph. I thought that was a wonderful presentation, and
with considerable difficulties.
yeah, I know.
Uh,
We'll catch up. We'll catch up on time. We'll be good on the next round. And
Yeah.
I think the presentation format, them being able to think and talk a little bit, we get a lot of positive feedback on that. So I think this is a good way for us to go. And so, how are you feeling?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know. I mean, I myself,
Mm.
I feel halfway comfortable, but I regret, of course, those difficulties at the beginning. That was quite surprising because in recent years we have done so often at Zoom meetings, and that I don't know why that never has arrived so far, uh,
Yeah, I
and
know.
If I may say, that happens to the best of us, and don't worry, with the post edits, we can make you look like nothing happened.
yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, of course, yes.
But yeah, no, all is good, and it was a wonderful presentation. It was very clear, and so they should come up with some good questions. We'll only be able to take maybe one, two, or three, depending on.
As a matter of fact, we already have 3 questions coming in from the chat. I could share those with you all if you want to get a heads up.
Yeah, that would be good.
So,
Yeah.
how Schweitzer is asking, the CBDC intended to address the monetary velocity issue? And then we have another question from Sam.
Sorry, what was the question?
No,
Why
no,
do you
no.
address?
Let me interpret that when I heard it. What that one is about demerge, and it's the velocity. Well, if people have CBDC, is it a safe store of value, or do
Yeah.
they just spend it more quickly, like within a month or 2 months, or is it, or you can store it indefinitely? Also, I don't know if you want to bring up Kumov's idea of putting interest on it, but you can skip that, I think, too. But what other questions?
Yeah, I left that out. Of course, that would be part of when considering the near future and the tension between CBDC and bank money. So the question of whether or not that that means of payment would be interest bearing. That's one question among others.
Yeah.
And the how do you say the demerge? Demerge?
Yeah, demerge. Either way, both ways work. Demerge.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that could be implemented, but in my opinion,
But
that
wait,
would be
you don't have to give up me the answer. Let's wait for
no. Okay, but I've understood that. But okay, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What other questions?
Yeah, I also shared them in the chat. So the other question is from Sam Hummel, and it's a two-part question. He is asking, what does it mean that it is not centrally programmable? And what is central programmability?
Mhm.
And then the last question is from Stephen Shouten, and he is asking, if the central bank is privately owned, how can CBDC be called sovereign and is as in we
Oh,
the
yeah.
money system?
Yes.
That's people in this country getting confused, I think, probably.
And those are the 3 that we have so far, but I'm sure to the breakout rooms people are gonna have.
Well, the breakout room will end in a little less than 4 minutes, Joseph. And you could begin if you're comfortable with those questions and you have them. Yeah, okay. I'm writing them down now. I'm making sure I could ask them, or you could just answer them right away if you have them written down.
Yeah.
Also, the questions,
No,
I share them in the chat. In
no,
case.
I guess everyone should uh, hear the questions. No.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. Very good. Yeah, obvious, very good. I can read the last two, and the one about the merge, I can make it up if I summarize those three questions, and then we can talk. We can get a lot done quickly, and then we can get a fourth question, and then two or something, and then
Yeah.
go on to the next presentation. So we're doing good. We have 2.5 minutes. Oh wait. Is there a way to get them out in 2.5 minutes, or do we have to go for 60 seconds in addition?
So no, this time I lowered the time to 30 seconds.
Okay,
It's
thanks.
gonna be 30 seconds after that.
Okay, so less
Yeah, I
than
just like
3
to give them a
minutes.
little heads up so that they can wrap up any conversations.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, 30 seconds is plenty. We got to put a little
Yeah.
discipline.
Yeah,
We got
yeah.
to be able to I'm joking on this one. We got to be able to pull their tokens away from them. Teasing. Um, so it's Howard, Sam, and Steve. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll call on them right away, and if they don't ask right away, I'll do it.
Nice.
Alfonso, do I have to do something
Um,
with the technique here to pushing some button or what?
so
Or
right
I just
now,
leave?
unless you want to do another screen share, you don't have to worry about anything else. I will do the screen spotlighting so you
Okay,
main
fine.
screen.
Okay, nice.
No worries. And earlier I was trying to do a remote control. I don't know you saw the notification, but
Yeah.
in future cases, I can always help you control the computer from afar, even.
Okay, fine. Yeah, that's assuring.
No worries. I wasn't sure if I would understand because I saw that it was in German, but I was already having Google Translate handy in case it was needed.
Yeah.
All right, people should be coming back in the next 50
Yeah.
seconds or so.
My mom's side is German,
Huh.
and it was a farm family with 13 kids,
Mm.
and
My dear.
and she was one of the younger kids. All of the older kids spoke good German, and if they wanted to learn it, some of them kept it, and I never kept. I was never taught it as a kid, so I was a sad situation. I would have enjoyed another language.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyhow, it's rough being an American sometime. My Spanish is okay, and actually I speak Siberian Yupik Eskimo a little bit too.
Oh.
And and
Admirable.
I've written about their gift economy without money, Joseph, and I'm going to send that to you.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It'll be just for a fun reading entertainment. It's only like 5-6 pages or something, and I
No,
could
send it to me. That's interesting. I would like to read that. Yes.
Yeah, it's based on real experiences, so we'll have fun with it sometime as
Yeah.
a fun project for you and me. That would be nice.
Great. All right, most of the folks are already back in the main room.
Okay, is Howard available? He had Howard, then Sam Hummel, and then Steve. I'm not sure of Steve's last name right now, but let's get them started because they all had questions. Howard's question, Howard, I'm just going to summarize it. It was on demerge, if I use one word, but it was about money losing value over time, or Do you remember your question, Howard?
No, I don't remember that question. I was just asking about is CBDC intended to address the monetary velocity issue that is happening? From what I am looking at graphs of seeing velocity drop off, and despite more money being issued. And I wondered, it just seems so strange to me. I don't know much about it, but what do you think, Joe?
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry not to understand the question.
Let me,
I understood you asked me in which way does CBDC address the question of velocity? What does that mean? I don't know what that means.
Turnover of money. I think.
Oh, do you mean the velocity?
Yeah, velocity.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, sorry.
Translation.
Uh-huh. Should I reply right now? Yeah?
yes, if you can.
Well, as I showed in that table, so that they, of course, you mean the velocity of circulation in the model? Oh, now I understand what you mean. It took me a while. Basically, I guess the velocity of circulation will be higher because in the current bank money regime, the actual velocity of circulation, well, it's difficult to say because empirically we do not know the velocity. But what I know is that large part of bank money is actually deactivated. So we have a liquid part of bank money, which is demand deposits or sight deposits, however you call it. And that's the bank money in circulation and keeping in circulation. But as soon as you transfer bank money on a savings account or on a time account, then that bank money is deactivated. It is not being used as long as it's so. By contrast, the CBDC is like cash, and banks and other financial institutions, they will want to need that CBDC sooner or later. And so that CBDC cannot easily be created by the banks snipping the finger, but putting it on a keystroke, you know. But they will have that available, as I said, and so CBDC will be much more. That will be on demand. That will be demanded, and that's why I think that the CBDC will have relatively higher circulation than bank money has so far. But independently, I mean, CBDC basically can be created by the monetary authority according to need, literally overnight, or literally within a couple of seconds. And so I think the urgency of the question of velocity, the urgency that question had in the past it's no longer that important today. That's what I guess.
Is that okay, Howard? Are we good?
Yeah. I don't know.
Let's go on and get another questioner done real quick, unless you got a super fast follow-up. Sam, you asked a question about programmability and central programmability. Are you good there, or you got a question?
Just quickly, I would like a definition of that term. I didn't know what it meant.
Well, programmability means to set certain conditions, what should be done with the money on a certain account for a certain purpose at a certain point in time. And so the easiest or the simplest form of it is what we have today, so-called conditional payments. So we have routine payments every month. And so we have a standing banker's order. I don't know how it is called in the US, a standing banker's order, please transfer that amount on every ultimo or so. That's a conditional payment. And that can, of course, be enlarged and expanded so that programmability will include actually prescribing you on what to spend the money, or prohibiting, preventing you to spend your own CBDC for uncertain purposes and so on. And that means programmability. And also in the case of, we had the problem of negative interest in the last decade, when we had the problem of the zero lower bound, and then the central banks began a practice to impose negative interest, and I think that's very problematic. And with programmability of digital currency, you could, of course, impose to pay a certain, however you call it, a demurrage or a negative interest, or I don't know what. And that means making money programmable, confining the uses of money to special purposes, to limiting, to restricting the uses, and so on.
Sam, I see you, and I'm still wondering, were you also interested in knowing how the structure inside the central bank of how CBDC would be created and how it would move around a little bit too, or are you okay right now?
I'm okay with that answer. If it's not going to be addressed in the second half, but I think maybe it is, I'm very interested in how it is that the private banks are going to make money in this system and why it is that they're going along with it. It seems like there must be an expectation that they're still going to make a lot of money. And I don't understand right now how that is. So in the second half, will you address that?
How banks will make money in a CBDC system? Mm-hmm. Well, the banks, the bigger part of bank profit is always coming from crediting, from extending credit, and from investing, from doing a proprietary business by investing money in, I don't know, GDP related or purely financial so-called investments. That's where the lion's share of bank profits come from. And the profits from payment services is considerable too. I mean, it's not a quantité négligeable. And I guess I read several times that using the digital euro that will be free of charge for the money users. And so there must be some compensation for the banks, and that will certainly come from the central bank. And they may charge a little fee, but these fees tend to be, according to current. We already have within the banking system instant payment services. It was introduced in the United States in July, in other places a little earlier, 1-2 years earlier. So instant payment services, and so the fees on these services have been dropping from 0.01234 to the second, third position behind the point. So 0.00, I don't know what, and so that will not be. It's a service that will not be too expensive. No.
Yeah, we have another basic question. If the central bank, and this is from Steve Schoen, if the central bank is privately owned, how can CBDC be called sovereign, as in we the people's money system?
Yes. Yes, as long as the central bank in a country is truly privately owned, we cannot speak of of sovereign money. That's for sure. I mean, we are assuming today that the National Central Bank is a state's monetary authority, and its most important functions under state law, and that's actually that's the case in the United States today, to my knowledge. Formally, it's the organization is still owned by I don't know how many private banks in the United States, or by a certain number of U.S. banks, but the important functions such as the top personnel, the positions, the top personnel, and distributing the central bank profit. And these questions, and of course, most important of all, deciding monetary policy, making decisions on monetary policy in the open, how is this called at the Federal Reserve, the open market
Committee.
Committee. Thank you. And so here, these things are under public law or state law, and the personnel from the Federal Reserve and Treasury people are coming in here, and there is a cooperation. And so I would say that under that arrangement, I would consider to be, to my knowledge, Fed notes are legal tender in the United States, and Treasury notes were called lawful money. And that's basically the same. And a couple of decades, or say half a century ago, one could have questioned to what degree Federal Reserve dollars are really sovereign money. But in the meantime, I would say yes, because that's no longer under some private rule, like a private bank, like a private commercial bank. It's part of the political system of the United States.
Yeah, we'll take one more question. It's a good one. And in AMI's policy and in the NEED Act, the central bank, the Fed, would become a public institution. And but it's not totally, but its profits go to the Treasury that it declares, and that some of the heads of the Fed pass through the okay of, are appointed by the president, by the president, and are confirmed. And it's a little, but it's still a banker system up there, and we don't have outside voices in a strong way. And we do have the experience of last year of Omarova being nominated, but being torn down right away. And she was sort of like a people's person to keep an eye on the Fed, or to keep an eye on the banks as the head bank examiner, controlling 3,000 bank examiners. So there's concerns there. I'm going to take one question from, but I'm going to then have Nick, John, Ellen, and Franz be first up, but I'm going to have Carol speak. Carol, can you give your question?
Would this CBDC push away all paper money and eliminate them, or forbid them? Or would they be able to exist hand in hand? Could you convert digital currency into cash at the bank?
Yeah.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah. Well, should I answer right now?
Yeah, because
Yes.
after this, I'm going to keep Nick, John, Ellen, and Franz first
Okay.
up for the next Q&A, and they can get into their questions right away. But then we should hear the other part of the presentation now.
So to be brief on the question whether CBDC will be pushing out or pushing away, as you said, bank money, I think in the long run, yes. But first
Not bank
generation
money, she's saying cash in particular.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cash too. The cash is dwindling. Cash is slowly but surely dwindling away anyway. In advanced countries, that is not you see that the cash today is an appendix to the bank money regime, and it's in a political debate, the role of cash and the anonymity cash is thought to guarantee. That's a little bit idealized. Cash is no longer really important. So cash is about small change. It's not about wholesale finance.
But there is still a concern, though. Cash can still exist in the new system.
I think so. It should exist, but just leave it to the people, leave it to the demand for cash. And as long there is a demand for solid physical cash in the traditional sense, then that system should be maintained. The critical question is, you need a critical mass of users, and so that that costs money. A cash system is relatively expensive, the infrastructure, and so the question is, what will happen when people by themselves stop using cash, when they use cash very seldomly only, and how to finance that the infrastructure for cash will be kept. But for example, we in Europe, we are not at that point, except for Scandinavia.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go here. The presentation, I added Fernanda to the list too, and so you guys will be first up next time. So Alfonso, I'm going to give it back. I'm going to put myself backwards and give you the floor totally, Joseph. And if when you're ready, and thank you for answering the questions. And if we can begin the next part of the presentation, then.
What do you see? Do you see the slides?
Dynamics between sovereign CBDC and private money.
Yeah, that's good.
Private bank money.
Yeah. So this is now the second part on say the political dynamics that are involved here, the dynamics between central bank and banks, and the dynamics between CBDC and private bank money in the first place. So far, central banks have presented CBDC as a marginal addition to the money supply, which insinuates a kind of peaceful coexistence of CBDC and bank money, so to say, CBDC and bank money side by side. But as I think, this is misleading, because in actual fact, the relationship between CBDC and bank money, that is basically about competition and political rivalry. And the salient point here is that introducing CBDC poses the question of currency substitution. And that means substituting CBDC for bank money. Because the more CBDC there will be, the lesser the share of bank money, the lesser banking profits, the lesser the instability and crisis problems related to bank money, and the bigger the benefit for the public good and also for public finances. And currency substitution, I want to say, that isn't new either, you know. There were processes of currency substitution in modern times all along, for over 350 years now, and also, and particularly, during the last century, because the currency substitution then was that bank money, cashless payment using bank money, that was driving treasury and central bank money out of circulation. Now, that was the currency substitution we have had during the last 100 to 150 years. And the reason was that technologically, cash, be it treasury cash or central bank cash, it doesn't matter, is unable to compete with cashless payment using bank money, quite technically and then also monetarily, because the advantages of cashless payment are considerable. Cash simply cannot emulate that. And then the second reason is that non-cash central bank money, in the form of so-called reserves, now having account balances at the central bank, that has always remained confined to the banks. That was confined to interbank circulation and has never been made available to the public. A central bank account for everyone that was abolished and not introduced. So, and in that way, bank money was doubly shielded from having to compete with central bank money. And that, of course, that has resulted in bank money crowding out treasury money and central bank cash. So now, however, from now on, with the introduction of CBDC in the near future, I think there is basically, and over time, a good chance for CBDC to drive out bank money, because digital cashless payment using CBDC, that will become available to the broad public. That's the salient point here. And so bank money will have to compete with retail CBDC. And this in turn opens up the prospect of said currency substitution. In fact, the possibility now for bank money to be crowded out, this time by CBDC. And the more CBDC will spread, the more this is then going to be a systemic shift. This is a change in the monetary system we are going to have. Of course, that needs to be said. I mean, what I said, that is basically true. But in the near future, to what extent and how quickly that currency substitution will take place, that of course depends on the ways CBDC is designed and implemented by the central banks. And so let's have a look here on how the banking sector, the point of view from the banking sector. And that has changed in recent years, because until a couple of years ago, not too many bankers worried about CBDC, because after all, using cash, I mean, coins and notes, that has always been part of the banking business. And so they thought digital cash might be somewhat similar to that. But in actual fact, bankers are realizing now that using traditional physical cash is very different from having to deal with digital cash in the form of CBDC, because there is that competition problem. And even if shielded from seriously having to compete with CBDC for now, that currency substitution will take hold over time, and thus setting the public interest of central banks and governments on a collision course with the interests of private banking. And so in the long run, as ever more bankers now understand, the introduction of CBDC threatens to be the beginning of the end of bank money dominance over time. And this would be the more true, the more the existing state guarantees for bank money, central bank liquidity guarantees, and also government guarantees. If these guarantees were reduced or removed altogether, and so in becoming aware of bank money's vulnerability, if having to compete with CBDC, the banking community and also some supportive politicians very loudly have begun to talk down CBDC. And the main line of argumentation is to say that CBDC is said to be a solution in search of a problem, whereby the chronic problems of the bank money regime are swept under the table, such as instability, crisis proneness, inherent to fractional reserve banking, and also the recurrent constraint for central banks and governments to come to the rescue of banks in order to save the nation's money that is in actual fact held hostage on the bank's balance sheet, which is not the case with CBDC. And yet, so CBDC has come under some political pressure currently since about 1 to 2 years, increasingly. Pressure from the side of large banks, banking associations, conservative think tanks, and banking-friendly politicians. And some even want to prevent CBDC by way of legal prohibition in the United States. And others just want to postpone CBDC as long as possible. So we're postponing that currency substitution as much as possible. And in any case, pressure is being exerted on central banks to pursue a conservative course, bank money protective, a restrictive course in the design and implementation of CBDC, so as to continue shielding bank money from having to compete with CBDC. And that's the reason for the limits on the use of CBDC, and that's the reason for that so-called waterfall mechanism I mentioned, which is, so to say, compulsive re-exchange or exchanging back of CBDC into bank money. And these are mechanisms and rules of first-generation CBDC simply to avoid that bank money is exposed to competition with CBDC. And it seems to me the real problem with this whole story, that is the ambivalence of central banks about CBDC. I mean, as we have seen in that map, the world map on central banks piloting and introducing CBDC, so that it will certainly come, CBDC, but central banks, how should I say, they are not exactly in a hurry to do so. And the reasons for the hesitancy and the overcautious tiptoeing of central banks are to be found in internal political disagreement on the matter. Central bankers they do not speak, they do not entirely agree on CBDC. There are different opinions on whether or not CBDC would be a good thing to have. And the reason is here, CBDCs are, central banks, they are caught in a role conflict. And or to put it more pointedly, the central banks are the center here, the center of a collision of interests. And the internal disagreements run, it's trivial to say, like always in politics. So these disagreements run between the progressive protagonists of CBDC and the bank money conservative defenders of CBDC, of the status quo. And the progressive protagonists of CBDC, they recognize the need for change in order to restore governability to the system, effectual governability, to improve monetary policy effectiveness, to improve monetary control. I want to point out monetary control, not financial control, not central financial control, not at all, but just monetary control, and to reestablish or preserve national monetary sovereignty. All goals that cannot be achieved by way of setting base rates alone. Instead, attaining these goals, that requires being in control of a dominant quantity of central bank money in the overall composition of the money supply. And on the opposite side, there are the bank money conservative defenders of the status quo, that is, defenders of the private bank money regime, including, that's the important point here, including the central bank's role as an auxiliary body of private banking. And these conservatively minded central bankers and politicians, they want to continue with protecting and shielding bank money or the bank money regime. And so CBDC brings out the ambivalent role of central banks here. Basically, central banks are here to act as guardians of their nation's currency, issuing the nation's sovereign money base, and being in quantitative control of the overall money supply, thereby ensuring stability and so on, also price stability as far as this can be controlled from the monetary side. Over time, however, the central banks have maneuvered themselves into being the national monetary authorities, but in support of private banking, anytime accommodating the facts the banks have created beforehand. And so the central banks are, even officially today, they are ascribed the role of being the protectors and defenders of the current bank money regime, as could very well be seen during the last systemic crisis over 10 years ago, but also again and again with smaller large bank crises in the United States, in Europe, and in China, elsewhere. It's always that the central bank and the government have to step in order to save bank money, because that's the money the entire economy is working on today. Now again, however, with the advent of digital currencies and the central banks being the issuers of that central bank money, of that sovereign central bank money, central banks, as a matter of fact, start to act as competitors to bank money. And in perspective, in a historical perspective, challenging the monetarily privileged position of the banking sector, and thereby also questioning the para-sovereign status bank money has achieved today. There is an English saying, it goes, you cannot have the cake and eat it. And similarly, there is a German saying which goes, wash my back, but don't get me wet. And that's it. It means that it is not possible for central banks to introduce CBDC without repercussions on the bank money regime and without changing their own role within that regime. And central banks are under a constraint to introduce CBDC so as to reassert their fundamental functions as issuers of legal tender-based money in the public circuit, which is the real basis for having policy transmission cloud and for conducting effectual monetary policy. That's it, what I wanted to say on recent developments in CBDC. And so thank you. And Stephen, back to you again.
Yeah. Joseph, I was looking at the chat a little bit, and one thing I'd like to, I'm going to give the answer first, and then you can agree or disagree, because I'm going to speak for you for a moment. And the question is, what happens to credit unions? What happens to banking, to the so many banks that are out there, and will the big banks become more dominating? And it's there's a reference to Professor Werner, who talks about Germany having all of the city banks, Sprachenhausen, and the rural banking systems, this huge like local banking systems, and then you have about the 1,800 or so private banks in Germany. And what would be the effect on this diversity of money getting out to people further away from the cities or out to other banking systems? And any thoughts there, Joseph?
Yeah, well, I know that discourse, and from my point of view, I want to say that our colleague Richard Werner, he tends to idealize a little bit. So the role of so-called thrift banks, called Sparkassen thrift banks, and cooperative banks in Europe in general, and Germany in particular. What is true is that there are many of them. They are an important part of the banking system over here. But you see, monetarily, they are very, very large banks. They are of the size of large banks such as the Deutsche Bank or Paris Bank in France, and so on, and Commerzbank, and the English large banks, and so on. Both the cooperative banks as well as the thrift banks, the Sparkassen, because they have umbrella organizations doing the management of the payments and doing the management of the money involved, of the central bank money as well as the bank money involved. You know? And if the local banks have reserve central bank money surpluses, these are managed by the large national central cooperative banks, and these are the decisive, very large central units, considering the monetary system. But it is true, of course, regarding the finance, regarding extending credit, regarding extending loans and mortgages, and so on. That's done by the local chapters. And generally, they have good relationships and close relationships to smaller businesses, smaller enterprises, medium-sized enterprises, and so on. That may be an advantage. But I think, from my point of view, I don't see why the introduction of CBDC and also, over time, a systemic shift towards a sovereign money system, why that would change the banking structure in various nations fundamentally. I don't see that. What I see is the impact I see is on the very large banks, because these can no longer so easily create money out of nothing as they do actually today, and having created in recent decades most of that money for non-GDP purposes, for purposes out there, the real economy, but for purposes in the first place. And so as also the very large banks will have to refinance CBDC fully, 100%, I think that might actually be a little hindrance for this for very large banks growing even larger, and so on. And it will of course, so it's the competition between the large and the small banks will be less one-sided, or how I should say.
Yeah. Also, the thought is that those banks tend to be more public oriented, and if CBDCs comes in as competitive, they may lose a little bit, but also they gain at the very same time because their customers have CBDCs and it's working locally. And so the money is staying local at that point. It doesn't change the system inherently. Okay, the questions now are the people are Nick, John, Ellen, Franz. That's the order, and then the order I see there. Oh, then Fernanda. Okay, first, Nick.
Dr. Huber, thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of things. The biggest thing is that in Europe, at least, your central banks are publicly owned, and regardless if the public is really in control of them. They are publicly owned, and ours isn't. And you mentioned that the politicians are in control of our system here, and our politicians are basically unaware of really how money is created. They should have taken your course, and they didn't do it. And so they're really not in control of the system. And I think that, if there is an inevitability to going to CBDC, that's a discussion or whatever. I mean, we want the full monetary reform. But I think a way for us to get behind something is okay, if we see the need that we have to get to CBDC, the people have to be in control of the CBDC. And I liked what Dr. Yamaguchi said, that not talking about CBDC, but just the present bank money system, that the primary problem with that is that it excludes three categories: children, nature or the planet, and future generations. So if we would say that if we could put these people, along with representatives from in industry and finance, in charge of the central bank, maybe we could get something. So if we had equal representation between children, the planet, future generations, and 1/4 representation to the finance and industry, then we could say that the central bank could make these kinds of decisions for us.
I may have misunderstood, I don't know, but I didn't say that politicians are in control of the monetary system today. What I said is that there are quite a growing number of mostly conservative politicians in America, Republican politicians, not only, but for the most part, defending the bank money regime and speaking out against, loudly speaking out against introducing CBDC in the United States, even wanting to prevent it by legal prohibition. That's what I wanted to say.
No, excuse me, let me just, I understood you said that. This was prior to that. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but prior to that, you made the statement that ultimately in the United States, politicians are in charge of the central bank. And they are. They can change it. They can amend it. It's in the Federal Reserve Act.
Yeah, well, you see, you're touching upon issues here that are, it's very controversial whether or not climate policies, environmental policies, social policies of any kind, and native people, policies in favor of native peoples, migration policies, and such issues, whether or not this is an issue for monetary policy. It's very controversial, and currently how should I say, civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations have pushed very strongly the European Central Bank to do something about climate change. And then the European Central Bank has said, oh yes, we are prepared to do that. We are really ready and we want to do something for climate change. And we will consider that in our crediting policy. But what can they do? What they can do? The thing is, they can make a list, say, of banks and even large corporations whom they consider to be more or less environmental friendly. I have been in that business. It's very, very difficult to do such listings, so to measure the environmental and social and governability performance of banks, and that the influence the central bank can exert that way in open market operations, or so in accepting the bonds and the debentures from private corporations as collateral at the central banks. It could have a certain influence, but in my judgment, a very little influence. It's a little, how do you say, a little green, do you say greenwashing? So, because currently central banks cannot really do very much about that. It's the banks that can do very much about it. It's not the central banks. And the banks themselves, they can do a lot about that. And that will be the same with CBDC.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of questions. I think we're only going to have time for one more briefly with John, if he's still here. John Conroy. And then I'm going to ask Ellen, Franz, Sue, Ronnie, Joe, Roger, and everyone else who has questions. Please write them down, and I'll get them to Professor Huber, and I'll get them back out, and they'll be published on the AMI website or send via emails back to you. I'll try to do both. So write your questions, and for everyone else, write your questions to me or put them on the chat, or my email. Send them to me, and we want you to we want us as much as possible to be on the same team. So think of it that way. What does it take for all of us to be on the same team? Go ahead and ask your questions. And John, I wanted a woman to be the last one, but you were in line, so I'm gonna. I
got in line during the last segment.
I'm teasing you, John. Go ahead.
But thank you. And I still remember the question I had, and I let it go because the conversation went in a different direction, but I will ask it now. And Joseph, I want to thank you for spending time with us this morning. We appreciate you appearing at the conference almost yearly. So thank you for that. And to get to my question, it seems that the total stock of money in a country, that the total amount of currency sometimes is increased and decreased. And so under CBDC, does anything change? Because it seems like in the United States, bank lending determines a big part of how much the total stock of money is. What has been the talk around CBDC? How will it be decided when there should be new money introduced? Who will introduce it? Where will it go? And who gets to decide? Any insights you could give us on that, and maybe even talk about, if you can, how they do it now and how it might be different.
Yeah, well, as I said in the first part of the presentation, CBDC will be issued on both tiers according to demand, according to market demand. The demand from us, the customers, at payment service providers for obtaining CBDC, and the demand of the payment service providers at the central banks. And so that's the mechanism. And basically, it's the same mechanism today. The difference is that the banks create the money at will, and they are fractionally refinanced in hindsight by the central bank, fractionally on the refinance. And CBDC will have to be financed 100%. That's the difference. But the mechanism to create and circulate the money according to demand, that should remain the same. But another big important difference will be that the central bank is able to say no. It can say stop. Something a central bank today, as a matter of fact, central banks can no longer do. They have given up saying stop. That was already 50 years ago. when they tried to put limits to monetary quantities, but their experience was they can't do it. They can't implement quantity policies because primarily it's the banks that decide how much money, and central banks increasingly over the decades had no choice but to accommodate to the facts banks have created. And with CBDC, that needs to be pre-financed 100%. So central banks have the possibility, according to their own monetary policy goals and projections and so on, at a certain point to say stop. And I can imagine, but that's another issue. But I can imagine that central banks may start to make certain macro distinctions on when to say stop, yes or no, and how much CBDC to put into circulation, whether it's on financing directly real economic purposes, or whether it's about financing non-GDP finance. Might be one point. Another point might be whether it's about private or public finances. And another point might, in fact, be if you consider climate and the environment as a kind of economic macro sector. So central banks actually were able to how should I say, to do some smooth kind of credit guidance, but not doing detailed credit guidance. That's not desirable.
All right, one quick follow-up.
Wait, John, we're well into Samuel's time, and so we gotta give it. And John, please put it in a question.
Okay.
Get it done, and you may have an extended question there, so put it there, and I'll put your question near the top of the list, so we continue with that one. I renamed my self. You'll see I'm Stephen.w@monetary.org. That's my direct monetary email address, and any questions that come in, or you can post your questions on after Dr. Huber's interview on the AMI website, and I'll look in all three places, including the chat here, to get your questions, and we'll get them answered, and they're important. So thank you for that. Thank you for your role in listening and being a part of this. And to end, thank you very, very, very much. Oh, and before I forget, this was Dr. Huber's book from about 7 years ago, I think 2017 or so, Sovereign Money, which opened the door to understanding this. And the more recent book is The Monetary Turning Point. It's not a cheap book, but if you write to me and you want this book, you get from the publisher 20% discount, and from AMI a 30% discount. So it's half price. It's still pricey, but if you want The Monetary Turning Point to go over this in depth for yourself, please contact me and we'll make it easy for you to get this book at half price. So again, another reason to contact us with your questions. And if you have the desire for this book, please let me know. It's our future. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Huber. And looking forward as always to the next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, next up is going to be Nick Ignatz as moderating Samuel Kazan. And is Samuel here? Nick's here. I'm looking for Samuel.
I don't see Samuel Kazan in the audience yet, but if you are here, please.
I hope he's here. Because I can't make his presentation.
Well, I could work on it, but I wouldn't be able to do it. God, we might have more time for questions, but maybe. Is Hobart in the audience?
Yes, I am.
Over, do you have any thoughts? Maybe one of us should go offline and try to contact him directly or
Yeah. Why don't you try to do that? And Dr. Huber is still here, so we're gonna just slip
I
another
don't know.
question.
Dr.
Till the
Arnay,
moment we got Kazen, but maybe it's I don't know what time it is in Germany. For me, it's 9:05 Indian time.
It's afternoon.
It's afternoon. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Stephen, very quick, who was next in line for a question?
Me.
Would also be great to hear Miguel Fernandez Ordonez's comments on Huber's presentation.
Oh, he is in the public
It's in the audience.
or in the audience. Better word for that. Well, we had people. Well, Dr. Ordonez, of course. I leave it up to you. Very hard, Professor Huber. You know Dr. Ordonez?
Hello. Oh yes, I know him. Yeah.
Yeah. Former
Very nice
president.
man. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm calling forth. There he is.
Oh, Miguel. Yeah.
Senor Ordonez, welcome. Go ahead. Have a debate
Steve,
or have
you're
a
muted.
question.
Well, you know that I think everything I know about the monetary reform I learned from Joseph Hoover. Then it's difficult to make comment because I agree very much. Let me be a little optimistic because I think that today Professor Hoover has stressed the problems, the positions of banks. It's the only thing that I would say that probably now we see that because CBDC does not exist. It's an idea. And then it's very difficult to convince people that this idea is good. But I think that if Euro citizens, to talk about the digital euro, have the possibility to use that, they would see all the benefits. That nobody talks about that because we talk most about the user view, payments, transactions, and so on. But the most important thing of CBDC is that it's a safe asset. Bank deposits are not safe. They are a risky asset. They are not money. They are promised to pay money, and they could fail. Then that for me is the most important. It's because it's public, but the characteristic important is that. Then if you see, go for instance to the Silicon Valley problem in March. If the enterprises, US enterprises that had millions of euros to pay the employees, and they could have the possibility to have a digital dollar, that cannot fail, never fail, they would never put in the Silicon Valley Bank because without any protection, without deposit guarantee, they have money because the CBDC and the digital dollar is like cash, it's money. It's not a promise to pay money. Mm-hmm. Then I think that at that moment, everybody would like to have that money that do not fail. And then the other question is that people will start to think and to see how the banks survive now because they have all the privileges, lender of last resort, deposit guarantee, access to CBDC, because banks now can use the CBDC, but not all the citizens, all the enterprises. They cannot access. This is very difficult, well, it's my experience, to explain this to a general public. But if you have the CBDC and you could have, instead of bank deposit, payment providers, that you would have many payment providers and you would have competition, Many private enterprises wanted to provide payments to you with CBDC because it's the other problem now that is a monopoly. But people do not see that banks are a monopoly. The state has provided a monopoly. It is impossible to make now any payment without using a bank deposit. Then that's the most important monopoly. And they could see that, and they could have many payment providers. And of course, the ECB has put a limitation, but they would say, why? Why you put a limitation in the good money that do not create crisis, that introduce competition, that you have a monetary policy that is effective, and you give all the privileges to a money that generate crisis, that make a monetary policy we have seen with incredible booms and boosts and trillions of provision of money, negative interest rate. That is other very good thing of the CBDC, but that is not possible to see because now what is that? The only where we have now is in China, but China is very particular. The banks are all politics, but I think that, and that's why I think the bank lobby in the past tried to say, well, it's bad, they don't have any benefit and so on, and they are trying to delay. The other day I saw the president of the Santander in Bruegel dialogue, and he says, no, the CBDC should be perfect, and they should design a lot, and so on and so on. Then that's why now I think for reformers, what we need is a digital euro and CBDC as early as possible that exist, because it's other different situation. And people would see what Professor Hover is saying and what I am saying, stressing my two things that are stability and competition, because I see this change like the possibility to introduce competition, break the monopoly in payments and in credit. And then is the possibility the CBDC had the opportunity to do that. No, that is the only thing that I would say, but well, the rest I think that, well, I follow with a lot of interest from the Professor Huber, and thank you, Stephen, Gover, and everybody that invite me to listen to Professor Huber, because it has been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel. Any thought? Well, I was going to, Samuel's not, we may have miscommunicated with Samuel, so we may have lost him for this time slot. And he was going to, Samuel was going to talk about the ideal central bank and who should come along, but Senor Ordóñez, the governor of the former governor of Spain's central bank. But I'm just going to make a quick comment. Senor Ordóñez in Madrid, and Professor Huber was there too. Professor Ordóñez listed, and I could get them, the characteristics of central banks and how they function and how central bankers think, so that we could better communicate our ideas and get them heard. So Miguel Fernandez Ordóñez, the former central bank person, has chosen to be thinking of the future of money and banking, and is very much a part of this community, and we're very delighted to have him. Joseph, how are you feeling? Do you have any comments? And how's your time running? I don't want to steal it. We're going to have a lunch at some point after this, and we can go to that a bit early and maybe perhaps start early.
Well, I have planned to stay with you at least until your time of lunch. And okay. As to what Miguel has been saying right now, I agree with all of that. And I think that one of the problems is to convince ever more people that CBDC is preferable to bank money. And one of the obstacles here is, as Miguel and other people have said, that most people at the surface of it don't see the difference. And the people today know that if there is a crisis, then the central bank will step in and provide liquidity to the banks, and the government stands up on TV and says, "Don't worry, we will stand bail for your money. We will guarantee up to, I don't know what, 100,000 euros or 250,000 US dollars. We guarantee that." And so people think, well, why should I worry about using bank money if the government stands bail? And so that's really that's a true hurdle, in the process. And the other thing is that becoming acquainted with all things digital, with digital payments, with doing digital payments at the point of sales or wherever you are. And so the older generations are not very used to that. The younger generations are. They have their digital watch and so on, the various gadgets one needs to know and one needs how to use in order to use CBDC. And that will be I think that's one of the several reasons why CBDC will not be a revolution overnight or over the year, but it will take some time. Not only because banks and conservative parts of central banks are trying to hinder and postpone the development of CBDC, but also because customers will need to have time to get accustomed to it. And what is happening in China, they still call it a pilot, what they are doing there. Officially, we have not introduced the digital yuan, but that's the number of digital wallets they have is now, to my knowledge, 270 or so. Digital wallets, 270 million digital yuan wallets being used in China. That's I would say that's a very big pilot or a very big part introduction. And even there, it's the process of adopting that means of payment is rather slowly, because the people in general are still not used to it, and they have some experience in China as elsewhere with using digital wallets. But the digital yuan, that's the next step, and so it will take time. And the Chinese government is doing a little arm twisting in convincing firms and companies to adopt that means of payment. And it has also, there was the order that in various companies and business, the next round of wages, the wages have to be paid out in CBDC. And so that's the arm twisting of the government to bring CBDC into general use. And I think in Western societies, the degree of interference will not go that far, and I think it shouldn't. It will go by itself, but it will take some time.
Thank you, Joseph. I would like to go. Let's switch things slightly. I want to go to newer people who haven't talked. I'm going to go to Fernanda first, and then Ronnie Phillips next. So, Fernanda, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Huber. I wanted to know specifically, I get a little confused with all of the deep roots of the problem, but my focus is really on how the public is going to embrace these changes and how we can bring monetary reform forward. I wonder if you could talk a bit about any outreach that has been done to small businesses or layfolk about how CBDCs would work and what the response has been from these groups.
I'm afraid not to know very much about that. I mean, what I can say is that particularly in the Eurozone, the ECB has started already 2 or 3 years ago a continuous communication processes and has invited all layers of the population, including small businesses, medium-sized business, of course, the large companies, and large and small banks and private households. Everyone has been invited to ask questions to the European Central Bank, and various meetings on that have been organized. And so I do not know to what degree that was how should I say, that was PR, and to what degree really the opinions and the preferences of various types of businesses and social groups and various interests have really been taken up and incorporated. I don't know.
In the United States, I'm a little bit of a Fed watcher, and most of their conversations, they have done, I think, one small round opening it up with educators' questions quite recently, and maybe CBDCs were brought up by some educators. I think that was just an open-ended, and maybe at the Philadelphia Fed, there was some education I heard going on, but not a lot at all, Fernanda. And I don't, maybe a bit on the business side, but very little. The Fed, I think, has been slower than anyone, well, than the Eurozone and certainly China. And I think the Fed has been more hesitant in general.
Yeah, one thought I had about the use and potentially abuse of CBDCs and how they would function on a technical level is that I observe when we use digital credit card money, for example, at the market, there's often a fee attached to using the digital form versus cash. You give exactly the same amount. You don't happen to drop any coins that get stolen by a banker on the other side. So I'm just wondering more about the technological implementation of this, and if there's going to be a way to make sure that no little fees are stolen by the bankers as we move on to digital forms of transactions.
Good question. Thank you, Fernanda.
May I say a word on this? The European Parliament is currently debating a draft version of a law on CBDC, and that law includes that any use of CBDC is free of charge to the end users. That is part of the law, and I don't think that it will be taken out of the draft. And that's, of course, a very important part, because otherwise one would have to, various organizations, banks, and payment service providers, they can be supposed to take very high fees unless that was prohibited by law. But I do not know. What I'm wondering is how, between the payment service providers and the central bank, how that will be regulated. But because that involves infrastructures, and that involves personnel, and that costs money, and someone has to pay for that. But I don't know how that will be regulated. That's still too early.
Okay, let's go on to a new person for a question, but keep questions coming. Let's go to Ronnie, and then if Ellen Brown is in the audience, she had a question earlier, and I want to recognize her too. But let's start with Ronnie or Professor Phillips. Thank you. Here,
well,
thank you.
That's right.
The one and only Ronnie Phillips, and let's give it to Minsky.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, enjoyed the talk. It's really interesting. What I think that the banks and the central bank and the banks are worried about is instantaneous payment. The Fed introduced Fed Now, but they've been very slow about that, because if I could today instantaneously remove all of my bank money from one bank to another bank, or stable coins or whatever, the banks would be forced to hold 100% reserves. So it's really this instantaneous payment, but sometimes it's called real-time gross settlement. Just like when I give somebody cash, the transfer value occurs. And I think that's what the Fed's really worried about, and the banks, because if you do that, then you can open it up to the stable coin issuers and regulate them as banks, but they'll be holding 100% reserves in central bank money, basically. And then as far as the government being involved, I'm in favor. I'm looking forward to Robert Hockett's talk about digital greenbacks. Digital greenbacks is preferable to central bank digital currency. I'm in favor of reducing the Fed's role in the payment system. That's it for the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you see, with the instant payment things, to be sure, what is currently offered as how is it called, Fed Now? Is it called Fed Now?
Fed Now, yes.
Fed Now, yeah, instant payment systems, and in the euro area there is an analogous system, and that's still about bank money. That's for sure. It's not comparable to direct payment of CBDC from payer to payee, using a digital wallet on the basis of a blockchain or another kind of cryptographic database. So these are really two different systems.
Right.
And instant payment is still bank money. And how that is organized with the currently implemented RTG, the real-time gross settlement systems of the central banks, I don't know that technically. But real-time gross settlement, that's the interbank settlement, and in various countries it's really immediately settled, but in other countries it's only immediately cleared in the system and settled at a later point in time. So the systems are different here, and I do not know how they manage the immediate. I have read it takes. The European system takes up to 6 to 7 seconds in order to perform the transfer from my bank account to your bank account. It takes up to 6 to 7 seconds, and how they do that, I actually don't know how that works technically. No.
But again, what they're worried about is, like in the case of the California bank, there was a lot of digital withdrawing from that bank. That's what caused the problems. Well, why shouldn't I be able to instantaneously take all of my bank money out of one bank and put it in another? There's no technological reason why I couldn't do that, But the problem is it would threaten the fractional reserve banking system as it's set up now. It would also impact the role of the Fed. And, the Fed is doing more and more. And
actually, I don't see that. I don't see that because so far these instant payments it's not used too often. Now we have now experience for, I think, for 2-3 years with that. It's not carried out too often, also because it costs a hefty fee. If you want to do instant payment, right, it costs the customer, it costs us a lot. That's really expensive doing that. And so not many people are doing it, and not many companies, because overnight payment will work anyway. And most people find is okay, overnight payment. No,
I agree.
And the other
but if you
reason
get all
is
those stable coin issuers and all those other firms that are out there in the digital world involved in the payment system, that may change in terms of reducing the cost.
Well, you see, Ronnie, in these RTGS systems of the central banks, there is an intraday overdraft inbuilt.
Yep.
So it's no problem here. So the should really, at one point in time, a bank not have enough reserves.
Mm-hmm.
The central bank will automatically provide those reserves, and the next second those reserves come in by way of other payments. But the bigger the banks are, the lesser there is a problem. It might be a problem for very small banks, but for a normally large bank, I don't see a problem here with the reserves. Technically, okay. I mean.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, thank you, Ronnie. And I don't think Ellen is in the audience right now. If she is, if she could come forward, but I think she's gone for right now. I think she had to drop out. And I want to get some new people. And I'd like to get Patrick. Is that Levine but Patrick, if you're available, you have your hand up there.
Yes, hi. Patrick Levine Rose. Thank you. So I'm very intrigued by this, and I'm very interested in reading both of Professor Huber's books. And I'm also interested in Robert Hockett's competing proposal. I put in the chat 2 responses to Professor Huber's proposal, and I only want to put them on the table so that I can listen carefully to what he says. And if he covered these points already, my apologies. First, I wanted to reference a working paper which I've read from March of 2023, published February 22nd from the Cato Institute. It appears to be a full court press against CBDC, so I don't know who's funding them, but the point is that they've got very good talking points against CBDC. The quick summary is that it threatens the foundation and the future of financial markets. It reduces credit availability. It disintermediates banks. It's a challenge to the rise of cryptocurrency. It threatens financial freedom. It's a threat to personal privacy if the Fed is hacked. And I thought that each and every one of those points should be answered, because you can already hear them on the floor of the House and the Senate if we ever debate this. That's the first point. And the second, quickly, is the IMF report from March, which said, and I'm just laying it out with the quickest summary because I want to hear the answers, and somebody's going to have to answer each of these points to ever get the transition. The IMF report, which is also quite good, though I don't trust it, it says that CBDCs would induce changes in the retail, wholesale, and cross-border payment system, which would have negative spillover effects on monetary policy. And the effects would include changes in money velocity, bank deposit disintermediation, and the volatility of bank reserves and currency substitution and capital flows. So again, the IMF is mounting a full court press. And I just thought there should be quick talking points to answer each one of these if we ever wish to convince Congress or the public to transition. So I just wanted to lay that out on the table, and I put this in the chat.
Thank you, Patrick. Well-stated questions, and we might need sometimes more research too. But Professor Huber, it's any thoughts at this time?
Well, I totally agree with what Patrick said. That's what we can observe right now, and I was a little bit surprised that it's new. You know that the IMF comes up with such statements because so far the working papers from the IMF were very much in favor of CBDC, but now there is inside the IMF, quite apparently, like inside the central banks, there is some conservative opposition, and I was surprised by that. I didn't expect that to happen, but in everyday politics, it's kind of normal in the meantime. And I agree very much that all these, in my opinion, wrong arguments that are put forth, about credit problems and disintermediation. Disintermediation, to put it briefly, that's fictitious. It doesn't exist in real world. There is no disintermediation. It cannot happen because banks are no central bank money intermediaries. And there will not, in a CBDC system, there will neither be shortage of money, no liquidity problems, and money can be made available. The problem is for the banks is really, as I said, currency substitution. It's not the bank run problem. That will not happen because people by themselves, they are not in a hurry to do a landslide from bank money to CBDC. They have no reason to do so. And disintermediation is a fictitious problem. The real problem is currency substitution, the potential substitution, the potential replacement of bank money with CBDC. That's the real problem. The rest is I say brouhaha. Yeah. But you're right. I agree. We should have a kind of a table or a list in giving answers to all these points you have mentioned. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And some of us, or I'm going to look to find those articles myself, Patrick, and check them out. It's hard to keep up with everything. Okay, we now have two regulars coming on, and I don't want to stress. If you're still okay, Joseph?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
As long as it goes.
Well, it won't go that much longer. We got to give you a break. Joe Polito, you're on.
Great presentation, Joseph, as always. I'm really enjoying your book. And I do have one question. This group fundamentally, I think in the background, follows Nick's book title, that is Change the Money, Change the World. And so they're very interested in how the public will benefit from the changes you advocate. I think we are looking for more debt-free money, equity money, and that the government can use for the public good. You've also mentioned in the past, of course, that the United States has rules against direct purchase of government treasuries, and you've process. Assuming that obstruction remains, would this two-step process with CBDC assist our goal of using debt-free money for the public? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the point is, which is to be criticized from our monetary reform point of view, the first generation of CBDC and maybe also later generation, that's still not debt-free money. It's not debt-free. It is issued by the central banks to the banks and other payment service providers by way of extending credit. Much in the same way as the central bank reserves are created from the central banks for the banks, in the same way they will create CBDC. That's going to be very conventionally in terms of balancing of bookkeeping, that will be a central bank, CBDC will be a central bank liability. It's no longer a bank liability, but it will continue to be a central bank liability. And in the same sense as traditional cash is in the balance sheet of the central bank as a liability. And that way of accounting, that's of course, that's outdated. As a matter of fact, that goes back to a world when we had silver and gold-based national currencies. And today, modern money is fiat money. It's freely created by whoever is authorized or has the power to do so. And so the accounting needs to be changed. But we have the same accounting rules across the world. The rules of financial reporting are the same across the world. Now, there are similar textbooks, but it's the same rules. And so that, of course, needs to be changed. And I think that will take the first step will be to bring CBDC to get CBDC distributed as a central bank liability. One of the next steps then might be to create some debt-free genuine seigniorage directly to the public purse. But that will take also a change in the theoretical and the paradigmatic software, so to say. But what is possible, I think, also in not so far away, that is doing some direct purchases of sovereign bonds by the central bank, which is, to my knowledge, prohibited in most states across the world, legally prohibited, except in Canada. In Canada, a certain amount of newly issued sovereign bonds are directly absorbed onto the central bank balance sheet. I think it's about 7 up to 13% of each new issue of sovereign bonds that is directly bought by the Bank of Canada, and that's still debt money that increases the public debt. But I mean, there is a mechanism going on also in the United States that slowly but surely, ever more of the sovereign debt is now it's ending up on the balance sheet of the central banks, and that is actually an indirect way of doing monetary financing, central bank financing of government expenditure, monetary financing in that sense. That ever more of the sovereign bonds are bought on the open market by the central banks, so that an increasing percentage of the sovereign bonds is on the central bank's balance sheet. That's a way around the current legal restrictions on directly absorbing sovereign bonds by the central banks. But a time may come in a not too distant future that at least so the Canadian model will be adopted elsewhere else. I think I don't know the United States, but Canada and Britain, maybe also Australia or so. I think they might be up to start doing things, and yeah, the mood in Europe might be the same. In the US, I can't say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Let's one last question from Franz, and then I'm going to call on Hovard, who's going to read a first draft of a COP28 statement coming from us monetary reformers, and for you to see how you like it. So Franz can keep his question not too long, and we need to give Joseph a break. He's he's done more than his share. So we thank Joseph, and we also thank Franz too, because he's important. Go ahead, Franz.
Joseph, I have a question about the role of citizens monetary organizations, or CMOs, in these, monetarily speaking, pregnant times. And
wait, Franz, say it again. Franz, you froze up. Say it again. After CMOs, we got CMOs. Then what came after that? Could you start again?
Yeah. In these monetarily significant or pregnant times, because so many things are happening, and with great implications for nations, central banks, banking systems, customers, different political movements, etc., etc. So I was wondering what your opinion is about trying to get the UN General Assembly together for a UN Commission on Monetary Reform and Transformation. So basically, what I'm suggesting as a role for CMOs is really to push their nations to push for such a UN commission. And so I think personally it's very important, because there are so many questions. If I look at your first part of your presentation, that's the technical part, has many questions there. And then the second part, the political part of your presentation, is also really difficult. And most states, or almost everyone, is engaged in thinking about these things. So what do we, citizens organizations, have to do presently? And there is a little bit of a hurry, I would say, because Rome is burning. Think about the whole global heating problems and everything that comes with this. And so I think that once a commission like that is going to be set up, then it ought to be not only reform, but transformation, because things have really to be transformed. And so I was wondering what your opinion is about such a role for CMOs.
Thank you, Franz.
Well, yes, that's a possibility, doing that. Why not? As far as I understood, your proposal is to get a UN Commission on Monetary Reform, to get that set up. Yes, why not? I have no idea how far that would lead. I mean, what we have here is there are various, in citizens, grassroots groups, citizens organizations. We have very many groups that are active in local currencies, in complementary currencies. They do not think very much about the official national monetary system, but they are concerned with the local monetary circuit. So there are very many groups. And then, of course, there are monetary reform groups in quite a few countries. Monetary reform groups like in the US, the AMI and the Alliance for Just Money, and in the International Movement for Monetary Reform. But it's beyond my judgment to see how far we would have enough organizational clout to really make such an initiative successful. I don't know, but if there are possibilities to do so, yes, we should go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also the presentation, rather than simply call it monetary reform, I think it would be more challenging for people and more intriguing if it were to say a UN Commission on a transformational Bretton Woods 3.0. Because don't forget, the IMF, together with also some UN organizations, are really dealing with in Bretton Woods 2.0. And that, of course, is the old story, reformist story of bank money. And so we really ought to use language that makes people ask questions, because that's the first start of the whole process. Secondly, I think it's also very important about the organizational principle of bringing people together. And I think one of the things I'm doing presently is trying to update the statement of conscience of the Unitarian Universalist Association, which dealt with the escalating economic injustices. And so what I'm working on with a group of church members is a 2025 statement of conscience on escalating monetary, financial, fiscal, and trading injustices, and a mounting, which basically comes down to a mounting monetary, you can call it even terrorism, rather than simply dominance.
Yeah, may I say another word on it?
Yeah, and then we got to give Joseph a break, and we're going to bring up Holbert, and then we're going to go to lunch.
Well,
take your time, Joseph.
Yeah. Well, what comes to my mind, that's with that proposal with the UN Commission, I'm afraid that the debate would not really be on the monetary system of nations, but it would be on the international ranking order of national currencies. Now, the problematic we have in the with the special drawing rights, and so you see there are within the nations, or say within the realm of central banks, there is the question: what type of money is dominant? What type of money is system defining? But on the global level, the first question is: what is the dominant national currency in the world economy? In what national currency are international contracts done? What is the reserve currency? What is the financing currency? The first one, and then the third and the second one, and today. So then we would have to deal with still with the system of a US dollar-led international monetary and financial system, and it would not really be about the various monetary systems at the national level, where it is about what is the dominant type of money and not the dominant type of national currency. These are two different levels. Certainly, of course, they are interwoven in a way, but at the UN level, beginning at the UN level, we would end up with discussing the dominance of national currencies over other currencies, national currency units, I mean. that came to my mind.
No, at any rate, tomorrow in the afternoon, late afternoon, I presenting a way of going about it.
Thank you, Franz, and good luck with that too tomorrow. Okay, everyone, let's give a big silent wave or a clap to Joseph for hanging in there a whole extra hour and surviving. And then the questions were left, right, and everywhere. And it takes a lot to keep a house together, and this monetary reform house is getting a little closer together. And thank you, Joseph, for your contribution in keeping us together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's totally been my pleasure.